and welcome into another episode of the Young Dad Podcast. I'm your host, Jay. Super excited to be with you, whether you're outside mowing the lawn, maybe you're outside grilling, maybe you're inside changing dirty diapers, maybe you're chasing toddlers, or maybe you finally got a minute to kick back, relax, sit in your favorite recliner, and listen to your favorite podcast. So whatever you're doing, wherever you're at, thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. Super excited to be with you. Again, I'm your host, Jay. Super excited to be joined by Steve here. Steve, how are you doing today?
Good. I'm doing all right. Thank you very much.
Good, man. Excited to have you here. So before we get into that, before I introduce you a little bit, just want to take care of some business, some housekeeping, clean up a little bit, tidy up before we get started because, it's nice to work with a clean headspace and clean space, of course. So I just want to shout out the partners of the podcast. The opening and closing beats that you hear on the podcast are from the Podbeat app themselves. Podbeat lets you turn any podcast or audiobook into a musical experience. It's fantastic. It's a lot of fun. Whether you're working out, running, you're gymming it up, or maybe you just need a little bit of extra oomph just to get you through the day. Or maybe the audiobook reader is just a snore, but you love the content of the book, but the reader not so much. Podbeat has you covered for all those things. So you take your podcast or your audiobook, turn it into a musical experience, and take it to the next level. In addition to Podbeat, of course, love my guys over at Forefather Apparel, the best dad polos, dad gear in the game. Light, breathable, fun dadism, bright, colorful conversation starters. They're fantastic. Shout out to Forefathers Apparel. Use code Young Dad, save 20%. It's going to be the best offer that they offer at any given time on the website. Outside of that, we have Dad Bod Apparel. You can use the code Young Dad, score yourself some support your local girl dad merch, along with everything else over on their website. Fantastic. And yeah, that's enough of the opening business for right now. Let's jump into here. Steve, a little bit about you. You have a heck of a story to tell, right? You've lived a life. You've been around the sun a few times already, in addition to the times you've already been around the sun. So a little bit about you. You were in public school. You were a public school teacher from 2002 to 2018. So a nice long 15, 16-year career there, if I
Yeah.
do math.
In fact, it's very, yeah. Go ahead.
And you were injured during a fight, a student
Yeah.
fight. At the time where you were recovering from your back surgery, you've had several more since then. So you've had, from what I know, 4 total surgeries.
4 total, yeah.
4 total back surgeries stemming from this school fight, correct?
3 from the fight, and then 1 because there was one that I had about 6 months earlier, and then I was recovering from that, and then the fight happened, and then that's what my recovery out altogether. It just pretty much stopped the recovery, and then required 3 more surgeries that also didn't really fix anything.
Gotcha, man. Gotta love modern medicine.
Yeah.
We'll get into that. Get into that. I of course have my thoughts there. So now you're permanently disabled. I don't know why I can't speak English today. You're also neurodivergent. You're diagnosed with adult ADHD and symptomatic of autism spectrum disorder. In addition to that, you have 3 kids, 2 of whom live with their mother in northeastern Pennsylvania. The oldest is on the autism spectrum, has ADHD, and is transgender as well. The second oldest just graduated from high school, and 2 years of college have been done already. So I love some of those programs. Some of those high schools are great where they have those like running start programs to give kids like a leg up going into it. To help them kind of find their path a little bit sooner in life. But, they're not for everyone. They're not for every kid, but these are great programs that are available out there. And I thought we'll jump into that probably. Yeah, that second oldest child is also religious as well. And your youngest, who is the one still with you, correct?
No, she lives with her mom. She lived with me for a year, but she's back with her mom. She's still with her mom too. The oldest of the 3, my oldest kid, is the one that lived with us for the longest and now is at Temple.
Gotcha. And your youngest is planning to go to college to be a teacher after she graduates next year. And then for you also have a master's degree and all but a dissertation for a PhD in educational psychology, correct?
Correct.
And that's something you're still pursuing?
I actually stopped. It was a money thing, essentially. My loans ran out before I finished my dissertation. I was in the third or fourth phase of the dissertation process and just couldn't keep paying what I'm paying the tuition to get it done.
Gotcha. Makes sense. That's
Yeah,
another thing.
yeah,
In addition to that, you also co-host the non-judging breakfast pod, which
yes,
is a podcast about Gossip Girl, correct?
yes, yeah.
With a friend of yours,
2000.
Seven's Gossip Girl, right?
Yeah, not
Uh,
the reboot. Just to be clear,
thank goodness.
because apparently there
Um,
are a few reboots. I've seen none of them. I have only seen what I've seen of Gossip Girl, but we'll talk
yeah,
about that.
when you're trying to keep the rights, you reboot things and they just don't turn out good.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
a lot of the time.
but yeah, that's what I know about you. That's a little bit about you, and yeah, anything else you want to add? Anything where you guide me a little bit. Where do we start? Because there's so much to your story. There's so much depth to who you are, and I want to do it justice in our short time together today to be able to hit as much of this as we can. And
Yeah.
so maybe we'll hit some more quick and dirty versions of some of these stories here, a brief summary overview and whatnot. And yeah, so take it away and kind of take us back to, I guess, wherever you want to take us back to in all this.
Yeah, so I guess one of the things my where my story's at right now, I guess, is I've been out of work on workers' comp because of my injury 5 years ago. And that's actually now, because it's been 5 years, almost 6 years, it's kind of coming to a head. We're figuring if I go on to disability, if I continue on workers' comp, there's lawsuits and all that stuff that doesn't really need to get into, but
Mm,
because it's none of the it's not what you think of when you think of lawsuits. It's none of the anger and none of the mean stuff that you think of when you're being sued or being in lawsuits. Just a matter of, do I need this? Yes, I do. I need to prove it. So which my doctors have proven over and over with eyes and all of that stuff. I've had back problems for a long time, for since I was 18 years old. It's just been, I lifted a lawnmower the wrong way, screwed me up, and that's how it's been for ever since I was 18. I'm 46 now. I know I look like I'm a lot older than that, and I lean into that. But for the most part, it was almost a lifelong thing I was dealing with, and got to a point where something happened in my back. I didn't know it at the time, but we discovered that one of my discs in my back slid down into my spinal cord and had to be removed. And because of where that was, it cut off the strength to my left leg. So I was walking with a cane, didn't have a lot of strength in the leg. And that first surgery, my leg was tingly, but it wasn't weak anymore. Like, I couldn't, it was a weird sensation. I couldn't feel parts of my leg, but it had all the strength I needed. So I went back to work. Wrong place at the wrong time. I tell every teacher I ever talk to, never break up a fight. It's not your job. There are other people to do it. And 99% of the time, kids aren't looking to actually do any damage to each other. They're as afraid of fighting as you are of getting into the middle of it. So I tell teachers all the time, don't do that. Let the people whose job it is to break up fights. I went into a classroom full of people who were I was expecting to walk into a classroom full of kids with their phones out and videotaping and cheering on the fight and all of those things that often happen in schools. And I walked into this room, and every kid in there, except for the two that were fighting, had a look of absolute horror. That the fight was so out of nowhere and brutal. I mean, these girls were, it was two that were, one of them was almost my height. I'm 6'2". One of the girls was about 5'10", 5'11", and built like a linebacker. And the other girl was, just kind of all over the place, out of control, with these two trying to fight each other. And I'll also say it was a fair fight. So if the one girl is like a 6 foot, almost 6 feet tall, the other girl was holding her own. And then just happened to be standing at the wrong place. someone got shoved into the assistant principal who was shoved into me, and then I was shoved into someone else, or something like there was a conga line of shoving, and immediately felt that stab right in the back, right where I had problems for the past several months, and I felt it shoot right down my leg and everything. And went to the doctor. Went to the doctor immediately. Took the next day off. Tried to go back to work and made it about 4 days, and I just couldn't be on my feet, and have never been able to be on my feet for 4 days. You know, for the amount of time that I would need to be to teach a class again.
Yeah.
And so it's, you know, as far as me being disabled, being a dad, that's where the permanent disability came in. Had, we mentioned, 3 other surgeries. It was kind of like one a year almost, or one every other year. First one was super non-invasive, just tried to get rid of the arthritis. The second one, they tried to take out more of the disc. And then the third one, they did a spinal fusion where they put titanium rods in my back and fused the spine together. And when they did that one, they said there's an 80% chance I'll get my leg back, my strength in my leg, and a 50% chance that my back will get better. I got the strength back in my leg for about 2 years. The pain in my back never subsided. And now, about maybe 4 months ago, that I lost the strength in my leg again. So I'm kind of back to where I was before I had any of the surgeries or before I had any of the other stuff. And they've offered me other options at this point. I'm like, I'm not cutting myself until I'm 50 again. Like, I don't want another
Right.
surgery, especially if it's not going to move the needle at all. You know, getting
100%.
surgery just to get it doesn't make sense.
Now, have they offered, and I'm just curious, have they offered like stem cell treatment or plasma injections or platelet injections, or has there been any like physical therapy or anything that came along with this? I'm sure there's been physical
Yeah,
therapy sessions for probably 2 weeks or 10
yeah.
sessions, or you get a little punch card full and then it's like, okay, well, that's it.
I'll be honest. And because I can, I feel like with the physical therapy,
Mm.
I took full advantage of the fact that I am not on traditional insurance.
Right.
That because I am on workers' comp insurance and they pay for everything,
Oh yeah, you still, yeah, yeah, that makes
all
sense.
I need is the doctor to say yes, he needs to keep doing this, and they'll
Yeah,
pay for it. So even it was like you get 12 sessions, but every time those 12 sessions would come up, I'd get more.
make
And I would just keep going. And I did that for a long time. I don't go, at this point, I was going every week. I forgot to, I forgot to make an appointment, so I need to go back. But I'm with a different physical therapist now. I did do steroid injections. But so before, a surgeon is actually kind of known to be a guy that doesn't that surgery is his last option. That
that's surprising in itself because that's like that's not common core for surgeons. That's not
Yeah,
common
yeah.
core
His
for
bread and
American
butter.
medicine.
His bread and butter. His livelihood is based on cutting people open. Yet this guy does everything he can first and try. I mean, he tried. I won't say he tried to talk me out of the fusion, but he pushed it off as much as he could. He
Hmm.
sent me. You know, it was no more physical therapy first. Get more injections. Get steroid injections. Get cortisol injections, do other stuff to try to strengthen the back. And then when it came to a point where there was something else, that was when he said, look, the only thing I have to offer is a fusion. And it was all very much my decision too. I mean,
I love that.
yeah, I have the utmost respect for my surgeon, Dr. Jallo. In fact, when I needed to hire a lawyer for the workers' comp thing, my first lawyer I talked to said, "Oh yeah, I know him. He doesn't, he's actually really good about that." I just thought it was normal practice until I talked to someone else who was like, "No, that's how he does things because he doesn't want to put you in bad positions." So
No, that's awesome.
yeah,
So no stem cells or no
no,
other.
nothing like that.
Okay.
And honestly, the other treatment that has come up a lot is it's like an electro stimulator, a spinal
Okay.
cord stimulator that they would basically implant in me that would send electric waves to try to help my leg. The workers' comp insurance doesn't cover it. It's
Makes sense.
not. Yeah, I think maybe it's not ADA. What is it? ADA approved or
Yeah, it
no?
may not be ADA compliant. It's probably a little bit too
Yeah,
out there. I remember
yeah.
I've done some electroshock therapy myself when I was younger. It was just like sitting on it, and they hook up a bunch of wires to you, and then they send all
Mhm.
the things. And I still remember that feeling. I still remember that appointment. I can tell you exactly where it is, the street, the office, everything. It's like
Uh-huh.
burned into my brain. But I felt great after it. That's all I remember. I don't remember why I was there, but it was for something. I had to have it, obviously.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, but no. So interesting. So it sounds like this surgeon goes against the grain with some of what more and more majority of doctors don't, right?
Yeah.
To where more doctors like, oh yeah, let's cut you open. Oh, let's cut you up. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. Let's do it
Yeah.
again. Let's do it again. It's all about let's react. We see a problem. Let's surgery. Oh, we see a problem. Let's react. Let's surgery.
Yeah.
Let's surgery. Let's react. Let's do this. Versus these attempts at prevention, right?
Right.
These attempts at not having to do it,
Yeah.
which, in my opinion, is how it should be. That should be our last
Yeah.
ditch effort. But let's explore and let's make available all these other outlets and resources, right?
Yeah.
To be able to prevent this from happening again longer term, get better longer term versus just in the short term in the
Right.
interim. Because essentially, that's what surgeries are, right? There's an 80% chance on this thing, there's a 50% chance on this thing, there's a percentage chance on this thing. Like, yeah, but how long does that percentage last for is the
Right.
question, right? And it's like, okay, well, that surgery was so many years ago, and you were good for a good little stretch of time, and you were still doing all the other things that you're supposed to be doing, right? But
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
now it's back to where it was, and now you're like, well, now what? Now I have to
Right.
be cut open again, another
And
fusion of some type, another thing, another something now. So it's
exactly. Early on, the first things that was told to me prior to my first surgery, is that back surgery brings on more back surgery.
yeah,
Like once you start, you're kind of in it for a while. And usually that means 10, 15 years down the road, you might need something else. I had, kind of a different circumstance. But even my first surgery, when I talked to the surgeon the first time, he was like, he hadn't seen the MRI yet, and he was like, "I'm sending you to physical therapy. I'm sending you for these injections. I want you to do all of this other stuff first." And then he saw the MRI and realized that the issue I had could only be solved by surgery. That the piece of disc had to be removed for me to get my leg back. So that first one, it was the only option, even though we didn't know it at first. Then as it just went on, it was let's just keep trying it and see if it works. But it runs its course. It really does. And here I am 5 years later, and I'm a medical cannabis patient because I used that because I couldn't take at opiates, I'd
right.
be deader than heroin by now if I was took them as often as I need pain relief. And, I used to I guess this was 20 years of problems. So it used to be my back would go out and I'd get a bunch of Advil and I'd take Advil for a week and I'd feel kind of, my stomach would get kind of gross by the end. Uh, then my back would get better, but that doesn't happen anymore,
Yeah,
And so like I can't be on a regimen of Advil. I can't be on opiates to, to get past this. And so I ended up using medical cannabis because that's something I can use every day. I'm not going to destroy my stomach. It's just not going to hurt me the way that other medications can.
yeah, yeah, and that's interesting in itself, right? Like, I can imagine that the opiates were pushed, right? And I've been
Early on, by especially by workers' comp doctor, yes. I have actually a funny story that so before medical cannabis was legal, I would use it every now and then because, like I said, these back problems would come up. And I was at one point talking to a doctor and saying, I don't like using opiates because they scare me because I have that potential for addiction on it, and I don't want
Mhm.
that. And I said, "You sometimes use cannabis." And her response was, I don't want you using cannabis because of the potential for addiction. I'm going to write you this prescription for a low dose opiate. So instead of and I remember her giving me that prescription and walking out that day thinking that we're done here. I'm not going to a doctor who is going to tell me something that is counterintuitive to what I already know.
Right.
I'm not going to sit here. I'm not going to sit here and say that people can't get addicted to cannabis because I know that's not true. And I know that I am. Like I know that I have an addiction, but it's the addiction I chose to have over the one that was going to kill me faster.
Yeah, no, I think it's I mean, of course, my stance on it. I'm sober. I'm sober from everything but like energy drinks and caffeine and
Mm-hmm.
things
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that. That's where my addiction lies. I feel like we all have addictions, we all have vices, we all have things that pull us in one direction or another. But I would say when a choice is given to you between opiates and marijuana, it's a pretty clear and obvious choice which one you probably should take over the other there. So,
yeah, yeah.
uh,
My ideally would like to do neither.
right. Well,
You know
ideally, I would like for everything to work the first time, and I would have been back
exactly.
to work, 5 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. I miss my job. I was a teacher and I was a good teacher. I was very good at my job. Looked a little bit more like a normal high school teacher, but being
Now,
out of
is
work
there
for 5 years, you end up with a goatee and a mohawk eventually.
Yeah. Now, is there any chance that if this all comes to a head and come to a close in the next, I don't know, 2, 3 years, is there any chance, let's say you're 50, you're 46, so by the time you're 50, let's say the sales all closed and where it has to be, is there any chance to go back into the education field? Any chance to maybe be an online only teacher, work with an online program, or go to a higher level of education with your masters and things like that? Is there any chance to go higher but be more remote based kind of thing, like work for like SNHU as like a remote professor, or work for like one of these like remote colleges, or work within like the remote program for like high
So
school, things like that?
yeah, I love the idea of that. And my biggest concern on those things is that I am needing to use controlled substance every day before I teach. So and I'm not comfortable not disclosing that. I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah, no,
comfortable. I
100%. Like,
the
be honest, be transparent.
Yeah, the last thing I want is my principal saying, "Hey, why,
Why do you look
kid said,
Your
yeah,
kids
why,
said you look glazed over. It's like, okay,
yeah,
well, how do those kids know I look glazed over?
yeah."
Uh, you may want to talk to them before you talk to me, Principal Jones,
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
thing.
yeah. I'm not the one with the problem here.
Yeah, yeah. Mine's medical. Here's my card. Here's my paperwork. So but if it's all documented and stuff, and it's well
Yeah,
known, well, then you get into another lawsuit for discrimination and all this fun
yeah.
stuff, and now you're dealing with multiple lawsuits. And
Right. And so right now, and sort of the way that things are planning out, it's a matter of there are things that I would like to be able to do. And the idea of doing an online professorship or something like that, I love the idea of it. Actually, my advanced education, my the educational psychology path that I was on, the entire reason was that I wanted to teach teachers. I always knew I was a good teacher, and my first year in the classroom, my principal said, "You have the kind of insight that you should one day be teaching teachers." And as a first year teacher, that hit me so hard that was the plan all along. So if things could roll into ability to do that without compromising, without compromising the fact that I need the medicine that I need and I need the accommodations that I need. And with a couple of vocational experts, because that's just part of the workers' comp process. And there we run through like, what jobs do you think you're capable of doing? And we've talked a little about like the online education and stuff. And it really does come to that tricky point of, what can I do that I'm not being dishonest to my employers, and I can really give everything that I used to give. And so, day, if things worked out, I would love to be back in education. I would love
Yeah.
it. I would love it in pretty much any role possible. I've especially maybe think that you said like the college avenue, something like that. But it comes down to a kind of wait and see of what I'm even capable of doing.
Yeah. No, I hear that for you talking about that. And one big thing you said there is like being able to give as much as you want to give to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being able to give what you used to give there. And I think this
Yeah.
is an important conversation to have, like even just thinking of it as for like a dad, right? Because,
Yeah.
as time goes on, we get older, right? We get older, we get wiser, we get a little bit slower, maybe a little bit bigger, maybe. I mean, for me, I'm just gonna get more jacked as I get older. That's just me. But I'm just saying. But no, but we always are comparing ourselves to our younger selves, right? We're always comparing
Yeah.
what is now to what was, and we always want to get back to what was. We always want to get back to being that fit, young, delicious looking, bronzed up, big, tall, dark, and handsome 18, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-old that we were, right?
Yeah.
Back in
Yeah.
that phase of our life before we had kids. We were always trying to get back to that. Oh, yeah, back in there. But we're not that anymore, right? We're not that anymore. We're not where we were
Yeah.
anymore. And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, well, what if all I have to give is all I have to give now? 100% of that is now just 65, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
All I have to give is 65% of what was that 100, but that 65 is now my 100. If I can give 100% of that 65%, like I'm still giving like just as much,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, of course, it's always going to sit in the back of our mind, and we have to overcome that ourselves, right? It's like, I'm not able to give as much as I used to give. I'm not able to do as much as I used to do. I'm not able to be all I once was.
Yeah.
But I can be more in these other areas now, though. That where that third, let's go 80-20. Let's say 80-20 here, because that's an
Mm-hmm.
easily digestible thing, the 80-20 rule. I'm 80% of what I was, but now there's 20% of also what I was isn't there anymore. But what does that 20% look like now? How
Yeah.
can I change that 20% to fit who I am now, what I am now, how my body works now, how my mind works now? Because I bet your mind's a lot sharper than it was back then.
Honestly, I'd say it's kind of a mix because there's been a lot of weed. There's also
I was trying to go the positive route with the marijuana there. As you get older, it can help improve some memory, it can improve some. There's some benefits, of
on
course, to
certain,
it.
yeah,
So
it's, and like I said, it's really kind of a little bit of both. Like I definitely get a little spacey sometimes,
we all
but
do.
and yeah, and I don't.
You also have ADHD, so I mean,
Yeah.
brother, same. Uh, brother, same. I have combined type ADHD, so it's brother, same. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
we have a legitimate medically diagnosed reason to be spacey. Yours
Yeah.
also is maybe a little exaggerated because of
Yeah, a
all the
little
weed.
complicated at times. Only at times, because there are types, there are cultivars.
That's literally what I was about to ask you. I was about to ask you, like, have you found a like strand while we're doing all this,
Mm-hmm.
or have you felt like your ADHD symptom and, or even maybe your own depression, or maybe any symptoms of spectrum disorder, anything for yourself that has been more so alleviated with the use of the cannabis?
Yes. So, and really, ADHD, it will go one direction or the other. And there are some strains. There's one that there's a strain that used a few years ago called Shangri-La. I remember it. I can't find it anywhere anymore. It relieved the body. It gave that body relief that I need, but then it also kept me just locked in. I started doing a task, and when I was done, I was like, I got Adderall levels of work done. Like I took Adderall for years for about maybe 7 or 8 years before I got hurt, I was taking Adderall. And really, Adderall really helped me a lot. There are just a few strands of weed that will kind of get that do that kind of energy that you get in the brain, that locked in, not going anywhere. At the same time, there are other strains, and I tend to use ones that I use at night tend to be a little bit more, lets me kind of go all over the place. I and kind of takes the ADHD wherever it's gonna.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I looked up the Shangri-La strain here, and
Yeah,
just I was curious, and it makes total sense if you think about it, just from like psychological or symptomatic perspective. Uplifted, energetic, creative,
yeah.
helps with stress, anxiety, depression. It may give you
Hmm.
some dry eyes, dry mouth, and headache, but those are some of the negatives. I mean, I feel like the smoke is gonna dry out your eyes. The weed itself, smoking it's gonna dry out your mouth, and you may be a little headachy and whatnot from the smell. I
Yeah,
feel like that's common. So it's really interesting here how this has an uplifted, energetic, and creative substance to it.
yeah.
And so I'm just curious. I'm just looking
And
it up.
yeah, limonene here on the yellow. Limonene and beta caryophyllene are both terpenes in the flower that boost energy and boost that creativity. Limonene tends to be food booster, whereas the beta caryophyllene tends to be more energetic. Mycerine, the dominant terpene, tends to be much more of a relaxing thing, but it's also dominant throughout most cannabis strains.
Okay.
That's the part of it that really lets your body kind of relax, and the mycerine.
Which is exactly what the ADHD person needs, is that relax, to kind of calm it and
Yeah,
wash over it, but then to also give it just enough energy to kind of respark it, but to be able to allow you to focus and be able to give you some
yeah,
energy to keep moving, kind of thing. So it's really interesting.
yeah. I
Something I
remember
haven't done a lot of research on, but
yeah, when I first went on Adderall, it was explained to me that the reason this works is because is that your brain, the ADHD brain, gets bored and falls asleep. You're not literally asleep, but whatever task you're working on, your brain is like, I'm done.
yeah,
I'm done.
yeah,
This is boring. I'm done. This is old. I'm done. I'm on to the next thing. And Adderall, being a stimulant, basically goes into your spine and is like, wake up. And it just keeps your brain so that even when you're on something that you're bored with, it's like, but I'm still here and I'm still going.
hmm
And so that's where that energy really kind of boosts, where it really kind of comes into play for that.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
No, I love that. Um, All right, so let's do this. Let's talk about the non-judging breakfast pod, because I wanted to hit on that a little bit
Yeah.
while we're getting to this point of the podcast. Or we can go two directions here. We can jump into the non-judging breakfast pod, or we can talk about any other topic we haven't hit on yet when it comes to your story here. We gave it a good little synopsis. I did not expect us to get into cannabis so deeply, but it is what it
That's
is.
many circles I'm known as the weed wizard.
I love that.
Oh, it is one of those things where, whether or not you intend it to, I often bring the conversation back around to cannabis,
No,
even
I love that.
unintentionally.
Like, I didn't even
It's
expect
a
to
big
go
part
there
of my
today.
story.
It
It
is,
really
and it's
is.
important. Like,
Yeah,
it's important to talk about too, because like there's to each their own. It's not for me, but what's not for me may be for you, and vice versa, kind
right.
of thing. And it's important for that education to be mentioned to our listeners, right? To be able to do like I did just now. I went on the Google and I used the internet and I researched it up. I pulled up the screen share of the website. So it was like leafly.com or something, or leafy.com or
Yeah.
whatever. I looked it up. I saw what the strains were. You explained exactly what those different things meant that were in it. And those, now our listeners are a little bit more educated because of it. So it's about using your resources, finding out what works, learning more
Yeah.
about it, to say, hey, something like that may really help me when it comes to like being calm but having just enough energy to focus.
Yeah.
Uh, but it's not for everyone. But it's, I mean, I think it's federally legal now, right? Or am I?
Not yet. It is
Oh,
still there. They've moved the needle. Medical cannabis is right now. It is, I believe, in the DEA's hands. It's in. President had come out and said, "I want to deschedule cannabis." It was a Schedule 1 drug, meaning that it is highly addictive and has no medical. It is in the same category as heroin right now. Heroin, I believe LSD might also be Schedule 1.
yeah.
Cocaine,
I love talking about Schedule 1 drugs because
yeah,
they're so interesting. Because you look at cannabis and you compare it to heroin, you compare it to LSD.
yeah,
There's a reason why there was so much enlightenment back in the days when LSD was more widely available.
yeah, yeah,
I love the conspiracies behind it, to where, if we still had LSD around, we wouldn't be having the society that we have today, because
yeah,
we'd all be a little bit more open, we'd all be a little bit more calm, we all be a little bit more just like, our minds would be a little bit more unlocked, more or less.
yeah.
That's
Well,
why it's gone now.
and
And
I'm
heroin,
glad.
I mean,
Yeah, well, yeah.
that ran rampart during World War II. I mean, there's videos of freaking Hitler tweaking on heroin.
Well, that's invented. It was invented as a non-addictive means of getting people off of morphine,
Yeah,
and
and
then
it
they
was just like a
realized that it was more
stimulant.
addictive than morphine.
Yeah, and it's a stimulant too, right? It's like to keep you awake. So they were giving it to the soldiers in the trenches,
Yeah,
and they were feeding it to these soldiers for these wars to keep them going. It's like,
yeah,
here's your little tablet, keep going. And I mean, with the Olympics being right now, so at the time of this recording, the Olympics are going on, but there's videos coming out of Hitler at the Olympics just tweaking out on literal heroin. So it,
yeah,
how you put those three things in the same category and you say cannabis doesn't have a medical purpose is far well beyond me. I mean, I live in
yeah.
Washington. I've always lived West Coast, and so all the states
Hmm.
I've ever lived on, marijuana has always been marijuana, cannabis. I feel like those terms are kind of interchangeable, but I know they're very different in themselves as well.
Yeah,
Um, and so it's always been legal everywhere I've ever been. So
yeah. And clearly it has medical purpose. There's been studies for years, and so our current administration said this has medical purpose. It should be taken from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3. Just for reference, if I'm correct, cocaine is a Schedule 2 drug. So
I think
even
so. Yeah.
so they even say that cannabis is more harmful and more addictive than cocaine, which I think is really funny.
Yeah.
So the current movement that we're getting is going to make it a Schedule 3 drug, which basically puts it in line with things like testosterone
Okay.
or other controlled substances.
Well,
Some of the
testosterone you
minds.
can get off the shelf at Walmart. You get
Um,
testosterone supplements at the supplement store.
I could be thinking of something else then, or it might be like the injections or something. I
It may
could
be
be
like
wrong.
steroids or
Yeah,
something
I
high or
be
something, but
steroids. It might be steroids that I'm thinking of, not just
yeah.
testosterone.
But it's not so much that it's addictive, it's more so that it competes with big pharma, right?
Yeah,
It's
right.
a more
Yeah,
holistic option to big pharma. I mean, that's why hemp got tabooed, because hemp was more productive, sustainable, long term, and gave you more purpose. Like a strain of hemp could give you clothes, it could give you paper, it
yeah,
could give you all these different products from one strand of hemp, right?
yeah,
Hemp was and is universal for so many things. Hemp is
yeah.
sustainable, hemp is amazing. But hemp competed with big cotton and big
Hmm.
paper, just like cannabis competes with big pharma.
Yeah,
And when you're competing with big pharma, they're going to use all their powers and they're necessary to be able to shut this down and to make it something really bad and evil, to be able to criminalize it, to be able
hmm
to, make it something that is bad and negative. I mean, over time that's evolved. I mean, over the last 40, 50 years, go back to the 70s, you look at what cannabis has started as then and what it's all became, psychedelics, everything's like that. I don't remember what podcast it was I listened to a while back ago, but it was like, imagine just if everyone every day just took a little microdose of mushrooms and we all just did a little microdose of some little psychedelic every day, and just imagine how peaceful. Just imagine life like that. Like, I bet you there'd be a lot less crime. There'd be a lot less of our mental health crisis. There'd be a lot less of all these different things would all correlate to this, and we'd have a lot more peace among our nation. People would agree more. Our government wouldn't really be as powerful as they are. Social media would be a great place, and we'd all be happy and thriving as a society.
Yeah. I mean, and I love the fact that you are starting to see medical mushrooms. In, I know Oregon has passed a law for it. I believe Colorado. I think Washington's working on it.
I think Oregon actually. So Oregon, what they did was they decriminalized all these things, right? They decriminalized all of them, but they've actually taken back that legislation now.
I do know that, yeah.
And so now they're really redefining it because they're like, whoa, we went too far.
Yeah.
You know, when you live on the left coast, that's what happens. Over here, sometimes it goes a little bit too far. Some things go a little bit too far. And so some things had to be walked back. That was walked back. The premise of it, great premise, just got pushed too far, too fast. And then we saw the effects out here, and it was like,
we need more harm reduction. We need less people in jail.
Yeah. Portland was already
Well, but I do know that they do have they have legalized medical mushrooms.
Yes,
in Oregon, though. So, which, you know, I've only ever tried mushrooms once, and I was an adult, very safely as an adult in my late 30s, early 40s. And I know that my experience afterwards was very illuminating, very positive. And so when I hear people talk about how they do these microdoses of mushrooms and how it just takes the edge off the anxiety, they're not high, they're not seeing visuals, they're just chill. And it's like, I know a lot of people who could really use that.
Yeah, so it looks like Colorado, but it looks like almost every state. If you look up this website here, I'll share it. I'm not going to go through and read all this right now, but it looks like the website's called psychedelicalpha.com.
Okay.
And it shows you kind of what we're talking about here. Every state's breakdown of exactly where they're at with their initiatives, the dates, everything like that. So this is District of Columbia, Measure 81 approved in November 2020, made possession and non-commercial use of ethogenic plants and fungi, the lowest level of enforcement. And then it just gives you timeline for everything then after. Indiana, they've begun the use, they've begun the discussion. Kansas, reducing penalties. Kentucky, exploring reduced penalties. Maine, legalized therapeutic use of psilocybin, but it failed in the committee. And so you just see all these, like, this is really cool. It gives you an in-depth look at all this. So these, again, it goes back to, you don't know until you ask questions, and you don't know until you do some research, and you can't just go off what someone on TikTok is saying about it, like, well, yeah, it's great kind of thing. Like, go and do your research, find out where your state's at on it, so you don't go and buy something, and then someone comes knocking on your door, you get pulled over with a substance in your car, and the police officer's like, what's that? And you're like, oh, it's just a mushroom. It's like, oh, get out of the car, you're under arrest. And you're like, oh shit, I thought this was fine kind of thing. So make sure you do your research. But
it's and it's also kind of interesting because the stuff you need, I don't know how to do this, and I don't know much about the process, but I have a friend who used to grow his own, and you can buy everything you need to grow your own mushrooms legally. All of buying the spores and stuff like that. It's sort of like cannabis seeds. If you having the seeds to a cannabis plant, that's not illegal. It's just, you just say, oh, it's a novelty, I'm not going to plant them. It's once you plant them that it's illegal.
Yeah.
So you can get a hold of a lot of this stuff legally for free, despite the end result being illegal. So it's another layer that you need to be careful of. You know, I could do this because I bought it online. No, it doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't work like that. But no, so it's interesting. There's a lot of things here. There's a lot of great work going on, just nationwide. It looks like to
Yeah.
decriminalize some of these things to get them more commonplace. And we'll see the benefits of it. There's a lot of really cool psychotherapies that use psilocybin or
Mm-hmm.
other psychedelics during sessions, psychedelic-based therapies, counseling sessions,
Yeah.
things like that. They're becoming more and more commonplace. I wish we would have done this when we shut down as a country, when we shut down all the mental institutions, just
Mm-hmm.
replace them with psychedelic treatment centers.
Yeah.
Uh, and if we had more psychedelic treatment centers, I am fairly confident in saying that our streets would be very clean.
Mm-hmm.
Our We would be able to get a lot of people up and off the streets, up and off fentanyl, and up and off
Mm-hmm.
whatever they're on the streets, heroin, fentanyl, all these things that they are
Yeah.
highly addictive, that are ruining their lives. Get them the help they need, get them through a psychedelic treatment, get them off these drugs and back into being productive members of society. Um, you create a psychedelic treatment center, and then you have you know, a 100-unit apartment complex behind it, right?
Right.
And it's all staffed, it's residential. You create this treatment center, you bring in people in waves, however long their treatment needs to be, whatever they're on determines their stay, and you just go with like demographics and research and things like that. It's definitely possible. We have enough land, we have enough money, we have enough
Yeah.
things. I mean, it's
Yeah.
100% possible. And then the treatment centers, should be in major cities: Seattle, Portland, Oakland, San Francisco,
Mm-hmm.
LA, New York. Why am I saying only cities that are all blue? Um, oh, imagine that. Um, Salt Lake City. Sorry, Salt Lake City. There's another one. Las Vegas,
Yeah.
Phoenix, Arizona. You look at any major city, there's a major problem with homelessness.
Uh-huh.
Uh,
Yeah.
it just so happens that there's a correlation. Correlation isn't always causation. That's all I'm saying there. But you could put these places in these major cities. That's where they're going to have the biggest impact. You turn these cities around, then you turn the big cities around, then it trickles out into the suburbs, and then it just
Mm-hmm.
slowly trickles out. And because that's where you have to start. You start with the biggest, and then you're able to trickle your energy and resources out to the smaller. And you can't work vice versa, that model. If you
Yeah.
start in little cities, then it's only going to be able to go as big as a little city. Then you're going to have an influx of people coming from the big city, and so it's going to be too small to help and to
Yeah.
do good work. So it has to start big and then trickle out into smaller, unfortunately. But it's definitely something possible and definitely something that should be there.
Yeah.
Uh, any other thoughts here on anything we talked about today, Steve? And we've talked about a lot. We talked about, oh my gosh, education,
Talked a
work,
lot.
preventative medicine, cannabis, psychedelics. Like, we talked a lot about all this stuff. But any other thoughts here that you want to end with before I close out here?
I
And we
do
didn't even get to
want
talk about your
to,
podcast.
yeah, I do want to bring up the podcast real quick. And a lot of people, the first question I get is why are you doing a Gossip Girl podcast? Because I am a 46-year-old, a 46-year-old man watching a teen drama, a friend of mine. And ultimately, a friend of mine wanted to get into podcasting and thought rewatch podcasts are a good way to kind of learn the ropes. And since I've never seen Gossip Girl, and I'm also an outgoing person that likes having conversations and likes bringing people into things, he said, "Why don't hey, let's do a Gossip Girl podcast?" And I said, "Okay." I had no idea what the title meant until 17 episodes into our podcast, but we are the non-judging breakfast pod. We watch Gossip Girl and talk about it, and it's a lot of fun. So if you're a fan of Gossip Girl, check us out wherever you stream podcasts.
I love that, man. All right. Let me wrap this
Yeah,
thing up real quick.
sure thing.
I'm gonna bring back that funky lo-fi beat. I'm just gonna show you a little bit about what Podbeat can do. You can still hear me talking. You can still hear the beat. They run on 3-minute loops because there's some like science stuff that I'm unqualified to speak about because it's not mental health stuff, and so I'm unqualified to speak about it. But it's really cool. You should listen to the Podbeat people talk about it. But really cool thing that you can do is you can turn it up, because sometimes when maybe you're out on a walk, if you're at the gym, there's that awful noise of the world in the gym and grunt of people. So you turn it up, you can still hear your podcast going, and then you can adjust your slider. within the Podbeat app, you can also adjust how the tempo of it. You can adjust how many beats per minute you're trying to keep up, your cadence, all those things. So it's super cool. Love Podbeat app, turning every podcast into a musical experience. And one partner I did not mention at the top of the podcast, which is kind of on purpose, was the June app, Joon. If you've listened to this podcast for any duration of time, you know I love June. June is just fantastic. They're just great friends of the podcast. To where this app helps your children if they have ADHD, if they have spectrum disorder, if they struggle with habits, behaviors, habits, routines, all those things. June is a place you want to look. It gives the kids a video game while also integrating their daily tasks into a platform that's fun, engaging, and simple to use, where they earn and so they get that instant gratification kind of reward, and you also get to have bigger conversations with your kids about their tasks. You're involved in their task management and things like that, and so it's great. It's just great. Highly recommend June. Millions of families are using it. Tens of thousands of therapists recommend it. So highly recommend June. That's Joon. There's a direct link to listeners where you can try that for free. And if you love it, use the code YNGDAD to save off your annual subscription. So that's enough of the closing business here. And so, Steve, last question that I like to ask everyone. It's kind of my icing on the cake question. The question of the hour, you could say, is so I'm going to give you a question here. Let's say a young father comes to you. Let's say he's 18 to 23 years old, super young, just had his first kid. Myself, I was 22 years old in 3 months when I had my first kid. I barely was past 21. I was still just a wee little baby boy. I did not have nearly as much facial hair as I have today, and it's still not even perfect. Nowhere near your level. I hope to be there someday. But let's say he just had his first kid. He's super scared. He's nervous. Let's say he's a former student of yours, even. Super young, just had his first kid. He goes to you. He's like, Mr. Steve, I just had my first kid. I don't know. So he's obviously coming to you for some kind of advice. What are a couple of pieces of advice that you would leave this young man?
My my number one parenting rule that I live by, and it was told to me by my friend Chris when she first found out that my ex-wife was pregnant. And she said, never give them an option if it's not an option. And so even if it's something that you know you're guaranteed, I remember those days saying something like, hey, who wants to go to McDonald's? Thinking all my kids are going to be like, yeah, let's do that. And they're like, not in the mood for it. Well, I gave you that option. I need to respect your decision that you don't want the thing that I thought was really cool. And I need to you make those decisions. So anytime I give my kids an option, it's because I want there to be an option. If I don't want an option, and of course, my kids are all teenagers now. If I tell them no, there's not much to say no to, is what I really should say about my kids, is that I don't have to tell my kids no. I don't have to say, no, you can't see that person, because I know that if they're seeing someone who's troubled, my kid is the one who's bringing them to reality. My kid is that anchor. I'm thinking of my daughter and friend of hers right off the bat, but all of my kids have had those friends where it's like, you're the friend that I want that person to have. You're the friend, you're the person, that person needs a friend with your insight. But back to my original point, my big piece of advice is always never giving kids an option if you don't want them to have an option. Don't say, hey, are we ready to go home? No, I'm not. Well, we're going. Because now you're telling kids that their choices and their opinions don't matter. So I've made it a habit of, and I've caught myself. I've been in situations where when my kids were young, and I would say, hey, you ready to leave is the perfect example. Playing with their cousins. Is everyone ready to leave? No. Okay. I did that. I asked for that. 10 minutes and we're going. You're right. You are not ready now. You have 10 minutes to get ready. And then it doesn't matter if you're ready or not. But the choice was there, and their opinions mattered in that circumstance. So that's really the big thing that I say and aside from that, you have only one job that is absolutely necessary to that kid, and that is to 100% of the time show them unconditional love. No matter what, no matter how mad, how disappointed, no matter the circumstance, if you stop loving them, they've got nothing. because you're the one that has to always do that. You have to.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that message there. So Steve, thank you for your time today. I really, really appreciate the conversation. I appreciate the insight,
Absolutely.
the story, everything you shared with me today and our listeners. You can find more Steve at Steve.Marchand.
Yeah.
Marchand,
It's
no
not.
English, haha.
Yeah.
And that's STEVE period or dot MARCHION on Instagram, Thread, and TikTok. And you can also find at NJBPOD on TikTok as well. That's the Non-Judgmental Breakfast Pod. Steve, thank you so much for your time today. It's much appreciated. And to our listeners, make sure whatever you're doing, hopefully you wrapped it up by now. Hopefully you're just admiring that lawn you just mowed, that classic dance, or maybe you got the meat sweats now because you were able to grill, eat while you're listening to all this. After you're done sweating it off, go ahead and leave 5 stars, leave a review, leave comments, leave all the things, show your love, follow, like, subscribe to the NJB pod, and also to, of course, Young Dad Podcast as well. And I think that's everything. We'll see you next time right here.
Yeah.
Bye bye.